Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time, way back, to the calm, glistening surface of Lake Texcoco. The sun is setting over the Valley of Mexico, casting long, golden reflections across the still water. The air is warm and a little damp, and you're gliding silently across the lake in a flat-bottomed canoe that smells faintly of cypress wood and yesterday's squash. Each paddle stroke cuts through lily pads and sends ripples across the mirror-like surface. You're heading toward an island city you've only heard whispered about, Tenochtitlan, a place where entire gardens float like magic, and the land seems to rise from the water like a trick of the gods. You can already see it now, just a shimmer at first, then sharper. Wooden walkways stretch out into the lake like the arms of an octopus. Low mounds of green peak above the water, like sleeping creatures covered in grass and corn. Your guide gestures wordlessly ahead. You're about to see a marvel of engineering and farming that, frankly, shouldn't exist. You probably won't survive this lifestyle long. Your sandals are damp already, and you haven't even started hoeing. But let's enjoy it anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As your canoe glides closer, the city begins to unfold like a dream. You pass by long, narrow strips of land, some just a few meters wide, others as broad as 2 oxen end to end, though good luck finding oxen around here. These aren't ordinary islands. They aren't even quite land. They're chinampas, floating gardens built from lake mud, decaying vegetation, and woven reed frames. At a distance, they seem to hover just above the waterline, each bordered by tidy rows of willow trees that act like natural anchors. Their branches sway softly in the breeze, whispering the secrets of centuries of harvests. You reach out and trail your fingers through the water. It's surprisingly cool. Somewhere nearby, a heron lets out a creaky complaint and flaps off into the reeds. A few dragonflies swirl lazily above your head. There's a softness to everything. No roads, no wheels, no shouting vendors. Just the sound of water or wind, and the occasional splash of something unknown, but probably harmless, sliding beneath the canoe. The smell changes as you near the city. First it's clean water and algae, then earthy, like compost that's been loved and turned daily. Then the scent of growing things, maize, beans, squash blossoms, wildflowers you don't recognize. And, faintly, something baking. Possibly tamales. You'll check later. You're not alone out here. Other canoes drift by, many piled high with produce. One glides past stacked with so many marigolds you wonder if it's being rowed by ghosts. Another holds a sleepy dog and several cages of turkeys who look only mildly offended by their journey. As the sun continues to dip, the city itself begins to glow. Tenochtitlan rises from the water like a vision, built on its own system of islands and canals, connected by elegant causeways. You spot temple tops peeking above the skyline, their colors muted in the dusk. Smoke curls lazily from rooftop hearths. Somewhere in the distance, a flute plays a tune that loops like ripples on the lake. You're directed to a quiet bank where one of the floating gardens meets the edge of a canal. A boy your age tosses a bundle of corn stalks aside and waves. His chinampa is ready for you. It's time to begin your stay. Stepping off the canoe, you expect mud, but it's firm beneath your feet. Springy, yes, and a little uneven, but not soggy. The garden is bordered by water on all sides, but held in place with rows of ahujote trees, the Mexican willow. Their roots knit into the banks and keep the whole structure from floating off into the sunset. Historians still argue whether the original chinampas were truly floating or simply artificially built-up islands. But right now, it feels like walking on a slightly magical sponge. A very green, very productive sponge. You crouch down and touch the soil. It's dark, rich, and crumbly. This stuff is called tyaxiv, a mix of lake sediment and decomposed plant matter, dredged up from the bottom of the lake. Aztec farmers pull it from underwater with baskets, then pile it onto their gardens like cake layers. It's messy work, the kind that builds calluses and stories. The boy hands you a hoe and points to a patch of weedy sprouts. You realize this isn't a tour. It's a work exchange. Well, fair enough. You get to stay the night, after all. As you dig, the sun drops completely behind the hills. The stars emerge slowly, one by one, mirrored in the water around you. The chinampa you're on feels like it's adrift in the sky. Crickets begin to chirp. Frogs tune up, and a soft splash. Behind you might be an otter or just someone's sandal falling in. You wipe your brow and smile. You're officially part of something both ancient and improbable. The Aztecs didn't invent chinampas. Evidence suggests earlier peoples like the Zacamilca had floating gardens centuries before, but they perfected them. They built a network of these water farms that fed hundreds of thousands of people, made possible by equal parts engineering genius and stubborn trial and error. And now you're standing, well, squatting on one. Just as you're wondering whether your knees can handle another hour of weeding, the boy calls it a night. He hands you a rolled-up sleeping mat and leads you to a small hut at the edge of the chinampa. It's made of reeds and clay, and it smells faintly of mesquite smoke and damp straw. You lie back, the sounds of the lake wrapping around you like a blanket. The stars above, the fireflies blinking across the canals. The slow rhythm of the water lapping at the garden's edge. It all hums together like the city is breathing. You close your eyes. Morning arrives not with an alarm, but with the soft splash of water against the sides of the chinampa and the distant call of a duck. Maybe two ducks arguing about something. You stretch and sit up. Your mat's slightly damp at the edges. The air is cooler now, crisp with the scent of wet earth and crushed leaves. Across the canal, someone is already singing, their voice rising and falling like they're serenading the squash plants. Maybe they are. You step outside, and the chinampa feels different in the early light, less like a sponge, more like a living raft. It sways almost imperceptibly beneath your feet, but it's steady. You're not worried about falling in yet. A paddle boat slips past silently, its hull bumping softly against the reed walls. Inside, a woman balances a stack of shallow baskets filled with something orange and glossy, possibly tomatoes, possibly some Aztec fruit your modern stomach wouldn't know what to do with. The boy from last night is already up, of course. He hands you a piece of warm maize flatbread and a small dish of beans. It's breakfast. There is no coffee. You're going to have to make peace with that. Then comes your first real walk across the chinampa network. He shows you how to balance your steps along the narrow borders, the tiny paths of compacted earth that divide one crop plot from the next. These are not wide. You are not graceful. You almost fall in twice. He laughs both times, but kindly. You'll get the hang of it. As you walk, he explains, mostly through gestures and a few words you half recognize, how the chinampas work. Each one is built like a floating lasagna, layers of mud, reeds, and decaying vegetation piled into long, rectangular shapes, edged with stakes and tree roots. The ahujote trees you saw yesterday grow tall along the sides. Their roots weave deep into the soil, anchoring everything and helping to soak up excess water. Historians still argue whether these gardens truly floated or semi-fixed by human engineering. Some say they drifted slowly, adjusted with the seasons. Others insist they were too well-rooted for much movement at all. But from where you stand, they feel suspended, neither fully land nor water, but something comfortably in between. Like a hammock for vegetables. Your guide stops and gestures at one chinampa ahead. This one is different. It's shaped in a wide crescent, and instead of maize or squash. It's covered in delicate white blossoms and a low buzz of bees. You bend down and realize it's a medicinal garden. Herbs and flowers used for treating headaches, fevers, even broken bones. A few plants are marked with small clay figures, probably symbols to keep the gods from stealing the potency before harvest. One flower smells like mint and whetstone. Another smells alarmingly like wet dog. You don't ask questions. He points again, this time toward a raised corner of the garden where a tiny shrine sits. A handful of stones, feathers, and dried corn cobs under a crooked shelter of twigs. It's not grand, but it feels important. You kneel instinctively. This is farming, yes, but it's also faith. Every harvest is a conversation with the earth, the water, and the sun, and you're a very quiet part of that conversation. A canoe pulls up alongside the path with an older man inside. He greets you both and lifts something from the boat, a bundle of reeds tied with thick twine. The boy helps him hoist it up. It's new building material. Today, they're reinforcing the edges of one of the older chinampas, which has started to slump a bit. You follow along, and as they start to work, you begin to understand how fragile and adaptable this whole system really is. The edges are constantly maintained, patched with mud and reeds, braced with fresh tree saplings. It's not like plowing a field once a season. The chinampas are alive. They shift, they settle, they soak and dry and sink and rise. Managing them is like babysitting a garden that occasionally decides to float away. And yet, this is how Tenochtitlan feeds itself. Every ear of corn, every pepper, every tomato, yes, tomatoes were here first, began on one of these islands. Thousands of chinampas tended daily, organized in a checkerboard that spans the southern lakes. Mainstream history loves to talk about Aztec temples and jaguar warriors, but here, in the gardens, the real miracle happens. These plots produce multiple harvests per year. They're incredibly fertile. In fact, some records claim the yields from chinampas were 5 to 7 times higher than those from traditional fields. It's enough to make a modern farmer weep gently into their spreadsheet. Of course, things weren't perfect. You notice some wilting plants, patches of pest damage, even what might be a small fungus chewing through a row of beans. There's a woman scraping something off the leaves with a carved stick, muttering softly. Garden gossip? Prayer? Hard to tell. You learn, too, that these gardens aren't just for food. Some chinampas are used to grow flowers for ceremonies, some for medicinal herbs, some even for raising insects. You pass a plot filled with piles of what looks like decaying wood, only to realize it's a beetle nursery. The bugs here produce a vivid red dye used in Aztec clothing and art, a color so intense that Spanish invaders would later covet it like gold. You pause on a footbridge between chinampas, legs dangling over the canal. A fish jumps, and the splash echoes like a dropped stone in a cavern. The boy beside you pulls a handful of tiny red chilies from his pouch and offers you one. You take the smallest and pop it in your mouth. Instant regret. Your face goes numb. Your ears feel warm. He grins. And just like that, you're laughing together, gasping over the spice. Tears streaming down your cheeks while the sky turns an even paler shade of blue and the wind picks up gently from the west. There's nothing rushed here. No wagons. No horses. Everything moves on water, or not at all. And somehow the slow rhythm feels, right? You lie back on the warm soil for a moment. The chinampa breathes beneath you. You're floating, not just in place, but in time. You wake up to the faint sloshing of water and the muffled squawk of a bird that sounds deeply offended. It takes a moment to remember where you are, and when you do, there's a strange comfort in it. You're in the middle of a lake, lying on a floating garden, halfway through a day that began centuries ago. Your host nudges you with a nudge that could almost be called polite. It's time to work. And today, you're going to learn what it really means to be a chinampa farmer. You trail him to the edge of the plot, where a shallow canoe is moored to a willow trunk. Inside are several tightly woven baskets, a long wooden pole, and a flat digging tool that looks like a spade and a paddle had a baby. He hands you one and gestures toward the canal. You're going dredging. You climb into the canoe, which wobbles more than your nerves would prefer, and start to paddle slowly out into the middle of the canal. Beneath the surface, the water is dark and strangely glittery with bits of silt and sun. You plunge your tool in and begin to scoop up the rich lake bottom muck that will feed the gardens. This sludge, called tyaxil, is sacred in its own quiet way. It's teeming with nutrients, decomposed plants, fish remnants, bits of algae, and who knows what else. It smells like a compost pile that's finally accepted its fate and started to enjoy itself. You dump a heavy scoop into the canoe and start again. Each pull feels like wrestling an underwater ghost. Aztec farmers, especially young novices like you, congratulations, you've been drafted, often spent the early hours of the day gathering this mud. They'd layer it over their chinampas, forming new soil beds or patching areas where erosion had started to bite. The work is slow, rhythmic, kind of hypnotic, a little like mixing brownie batter if the batter was sticky, heavy, and occasionally full of mysterious wriggling things. Back on the chinampa, you help spread the sludge across a bed of squash. It's warm from the sun and steams slightly in the morning chill. As you work, your host points out tiny signs of health. The bright sheen on a leaf, the way water beads on the soil rather than soaking too fast, a red dragonfly hovering like a miniature guardian spirit. You're learning to read the signs, to see what the earth is saying, or, at least, to pretend convincingly. Suddenly, there's a commotion on a neighboring chinampa. A small boy is chasing a bird the size of a chicken, but far more judgmental. It flaps, honks, and leaps into the water with the kind of theatrical splash that only comes from being absolutely done with children. Your host chuckles and explains, again, mostly through gestures, that these birds are helpful and annoying in equal measure. They eat pests but also steal beans. Everything's a trade-off here, even with the wildlife. There's a kind of garden dog, too, called a tlaoquiche. Small, barky, and wildly protective of crops. They're known for alerting farmers to the tiniest invaders, from rats to neighbors with sticky fingers. As the sun climbs, so does the heat. You're sweating through your borrowed tunic. A light breeze moves through the willow trees, and you catch the scent of wood smoke and corn from a nearby cooking fire. Someone is making tamales. You can almost taste them. Almost. You're assigned a new task, planting, but not with a shovel. Oh no, you're handed a sharp, narrow digging stick and led to a row of sprouting maize. The idea is to pierce a hole, drop in a seed, and pat the soil back down like you're tucking it in for a nap. You do this about 200 times. The maize is planted alongside beans and squash, the famous three sisters. Together, they support each other. The corn gives the beans something to climb. The beans fix nitrogen into the soil, and the squash sprawls out to shade the ground and keep weeds away. It's low-tech symbiosis at its finest, and frankly, a better group dynamic than most office teams you've worked on. While you work, your host hums a song. It's old, haunting. It loops around a phrase that sounds something like soil, sun, water, life. You try to hum along, but your version sounds like a deflating goose. He doesn't mind. There's a break at mid-morning. You sit together under the shade of a willow, drinking a thin, cool atoll, a kind of maize drink that tastes like if oatmeal had dreams of becoming tea. It's surprisingly refreshing. Your host tells you stories. Some are personal, others belong more to myth. One tale is about a chinampa that floated away entirely during a festival, only to return weeks later filled with flowers no one had planted. Historians still argue whether that one's metaphorical, symbolic, or just the result of too much ceremonial mezcal. Another story is about the Tlaloc, the water spirits said to live in the lake, who sometimes bless a chinampa with perfect crops, or steal a farmer's sandals just to be petty. You make a mental note to secure your footwear. You ask about bad years. He nods solemnly and describes a time when floods wiped out entire fields, or when locusts descended like living storms. The chinampas are clever, but not invincible. There's no such thing as invincible in farming. By noon, the light is high and sharp, bouncing off the water like shards of glass. You shade your eyes and look out over the lake. Dozens, maybe hundreds of chinampas stretch in all directions. Canoes slide silently along the canals. People wave, laugh, barter, sing. The whole thing feels impossibly serene, like a waterborne village dreamed up by someone who hated roads and loved compost. It's hard to believe this place exists, that it fed a population of over 200,000, that its survival depended not on conquering land, but making peace with water. You run your fingers along the soil, still damp from the morning mud. You're tired, dirty, mildly sunburned, and strangely content. You came here expecting a marvel, But what you found is a system, a quiet brilliance, a way of life that floats, sinks, and floats again. And tomorrow, you'll plant more beans. The morning mist clings to the water like silk pulled too thin, and the chinampas emerge from it one by one, like stage actors drifting out onto a clouded stage. You paddle slowly today. Your shoulders ache from yesterday's dredging, and your legs are beginning to understand that squatting is no longer a sometimes activity. Today, your host has given you a very particular job, one that comes with a certain odd honor. You're going to learn about what grows here and, more importantly, what feeds this empire, which is to say, you're on corn patrol. He hands you a slender reed notebook. Well, not exactly a notebook. It's more like a folded bark paper log, marked with symbols and lines you can't decipher. It's not meant for you to read. It's for you to walk, one field at a time, one crop at a time. The Aztecs were master record keepers, and someone's got to go check that the maize hasn't decided to throw a tantrum this season. You begin at the far edge of the chinampa, where the maize stands tallest. Some stalks are nearly twice your height, towering in soft rows that rustle with every breeze. You walk among them slowly, gently touching the leaves. They're thick and waxy, and they hum in a way only crops can. You never really notice how alive plants are until they lean in your direction. Maize wasn't just a food crop here. It was life. It was sacred. There were gods for rain, gods for earth, gods just for corn. Every bite was a small prayer. Every harvest a kind of ritual. And today you get to follow in those footsteps, literally. Your host points to a particular stalk. It's thick at the base, green as spring, but with a worrying curl near the top. You lean in, a beetle, bold as anything, chewing away at the newest leaf. Your host flicks it off and gestures to a nearby clump of wild marigolds growing at the edge of the field. Natural pest control. You nod like this is something you knew all along. The chinampa next to this one is all amaranth, tall magenta-top stalks that wave like tiny flags. It was once banned by Spanish colonizers for being too closely associated with Aztec religious ceremonies, including offerings that may or may not have involved very enthusiastic baking of ritual figurines. Historians still argue whether those amaranth figurines were truly mixed with blood or whether there was 16th century propaganda, getting very dramatic again. You brush your fingers against the flowering tops. The seeds are tiny, absurdly nutritious, and can be popped like popcorn. You're starting to suspect the Aztecs invented the world's healthiest snack several centuries early. Then comes the chili patch. You've learned your lesson here. You admire the plants from a safe distance. Bright red pods dangle like warning signs. You've heard that warriors would rub crushed chilies into their skin before battle. Not for pain, but to awaken themselves. You're more than awake. Thank you. Squash vines sprawl across the next bed, their broad leaves hiding fat blossoms and small green fruits shaped like sleeping toads. You're told every part of this plant is eaten: seeds, stems, flowers. Even the hollowed-out shells are dried and turned into bowls. One man's dinner and dishware, all in one plant. A woman waves at you from the neighboring garden. She's kneeling in the middle of a plot filled with white tubers. Jicama, she says, grinning and offering you one. You bite in and taste something between a water chestnut and a pear, cool, sweet, and so crunchy it echoes in your head. She laughs as you startle a small bird with your chewing. By midday, your makeshift field journal is full of mental notes. You've seen rows of beans snaking up maize stalks, bright tomato plants peeking from under squash leaves. Even a chinampa covered entirely in herbs. Episode, Hojas Santa, and something that smells distinctly like soap and sun. You sit beside your host, legs dangling off a walkway, and watch as another canoe passes, this one filled with produce. It's heading to Tlatelolco, the grand market of Tenochtitlan. The driver calls out greetings, and your host shouts back the price of squash in jest. You learn that these boats are like floating market stalls. Farmers pick their best crops and paddle to the city, where they trade them not just for food, but tools, obsidian blades, feathers, even gossip. It's a barter economy, yes, but one with rules. Certain herbs have special significance. Some can't be sold casually. Others are reserved for ceremonies or healing. You watch as the canoe disappears into the distance and wonder what the produce will buy today. Maybe a woven cloak, maybe a bone needle, maybe nothing. Sometimes the offering is enough. Your host hands you a roasted corn cob, still warm, a little charred. You eat it slowly, savoring the smoky sweetness, and look out over the lake. Dozens of chinampas stretch in every direction, their green rows framed by gentle blue canals. A bird dives for a fish, somewhere far off. A flute plays a single note that never seems to end. And then a question. Why didn't this system take over the world? Historians still argue about that. Maybe it was too specific, reliant on the shallow lake beds of central Mexico. Maybe it didn't travel well. Maybe the arrival of the Spanish, with their cattle, horses, and plows, simply drowned it in the rush towards civilized farming. But as you lie back on the soil, hand resting on a tomato plant that's somehow grown through your sandal, you realize something. This wasn't meant to scale. It wasn't built for export. It was built to belong to a people, a place, a lake that gave its bones to feed the earth. And somehow, 500 years later, it still does. There's a lull in the heat, an hour just past midday where the sun softens, and even the birds seem to hush. You and your host take shelter under a small, reed-roofed lean-to at the edge of the chinampa, and for the first time today, you're allowed to simply be. You sip from a clay cup of something thick and faintly sweet. It's a toll again. But this version is infused with cacao and a hint of chili. It's less of a drink and more of a warm, edible hug. The breeze stirs the willows overhead, their long branches trailing across the water like someone dragging fingers through a bath. And then, almost like he's been waiting for this quiet moment, your host begins to tell stories, not about plants or farming, but about the people who live here, the world beyond the crops. His voice is slow, deliberate, like rain tapping against leaves. You learn that chinampas aren't just farmland. They're part of neighborhoods. Extended families often maintain multiple plots, passing them down across generations. Children learn the cycle of the gardens before they learn to walk. Elders are the memory keepers, knowing which chinampa floods early, which one always attracts dragonflies, which section of soil grows the most fragrant herbs after a thunderstorm. One name comes up again and again, Camalpapoca. Not the emperor, but a woman, an old auntie from several plots over, famous for her medicinal garden and for allegedly surviving a lightning strike by cursing it back to the sky. You're told she grows the best Tlahuaquetzal, a rare plant used in purification rituals. Some people say her chinampa hums at night. Your host chuckles as he points toward a distant patch of green, surrounded by unusually dense willow groves. That's hers. You're not going there. Not unless she invites you. And even then, it's wise to bring a gift and a very respectful tone. People here believe that the land remembers, that each chinampa has a kind of personality. Some are cooperative, others stubborn. Some bloom early, others refuse to fruit unless you sing to them. Yes, sing. There's even a superstition about whispering your intentions to the soil before planting, as if the earth itself wants to know your plans before deciding whether to help. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were symbolic or deeply spiritual. But when you look around at the balance between human hands and the water's quiet will, you get the feeling the distinction doesn't matter. Symbol or spirit, it's all connection. Your host tells you about festivals, too. Not the grand temple ones in the heart of the capital, but the local ones, tiny chinampa feasts where neighbors gather by torchlight, laying out tamales wrapped in banana leaves, flower garlands, smoked fish, and fruit stacked like pyramids. There's music, dancing on the soil beds. Sometimes a canoe race down the main canal, which ends inevitably with someone falling in, usually on purpose. One story gets him laughing so hard he has to stop mid-sentence. A farmer, trying to impress a visiting merchant, claimed his chinampa was blessed by the maize goddess herself. Unfortunately, he had over-fertilized the plot, and the next morning, all his corn had grown sideways. They still call that plot the divine lane. A dog wanders by, a squat, wrinkly thing with a wagging tail and the kind of expression that says, "I've seen things." Your host feeds it a scrap of roasted squash. It plops down beside you, sighs dramatically, and falls asleep. You're not far behind, but there's one more thing to see. He stands, stretches, and beckons you toward a narrow, reed-covered canoe already waiting in a slip beside the chinampa. This one's different, painted at the edges with red and black spirals. A ceremonial boat, he explains. You climb in, and with a push you're gliding. The canal's narrow here, twisting like lazy rivers between chinampas you haven't seen before. It's quieter, more shaded. The gardens are more ornamental, filled with flowers, not food. Your host gestures. These plots are dedicated to Zakapili, the god of flowers, song, and feasting. This is where plants grow not for survival, but for beauty. And beautiful they are. Tall stalks of marigold sway in the breeze. Deep red dahlias, purple lilies, something that looks like fire caught in petal form. You pass one chinampa where every plant is white. It glows in the shaded light like snow under moonlight. Another has tall grasses that shimmer silver green, rippling like silk. Your host slows the canoe and speaks softly. This is where couples come to propose, where families mourn, where songs are written and sung into the water. These gardens aren't practical. They don't feed the body. They feed something else. Historians still debate whether these flower chinampas were recreational or religious. But again, you don't care. Because as you drift past an archway made of vines and feathers, and hear a flute being played somewhere deep in the greenery, you understand the answer. They were both. Always both. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent. Wet petals, mud, the faint trace of burning incense. Somewhere, a bird calls once, then falls silent again. When you open your eyes, the sun has dipped slightly. The colors of the flowers have shifted in the changing light. The whole place feels wrapped in a kind of hushed reverence. You turn to your host, and he simply nods. Some things don't need explaining. You wake to find yourself back at the main chinampa, reclining in the shade of a willow that has somehow curled itself into a perfect question mark. Your host is nowhere in sight, but someone has left a small bowl of roasted pumpkin seeds beside you, salted, spiced, and clearly intended to win your loyalty forever. As you snack, a familiar voice floats across the canal. It's your host, and he's joined by a pair of elders, one tall and wiry, the other round as a cooking pot and twice as warm. They're debating something in Nahuatl, gestures flying, heads shaking, a disagreement so gentle it could be mistaken for a lullaby. You soon learn what they're discussing, how the chinampas are built and rebuilt by hand from nothing. Because yes, this whole floating paradise, it's not natural. It's made, every inch of it. And maintaining it is as much an art as a science. Your host beckons, and you follow him to a part of the lake where no plants grow yet, just a murky patch of water dotted with wooden stakes. He hands you a bundle of long reeds and a woven mat and gestures grandly, like a magician about to reveal a trick. Welcome to Chinampa Construction 101, where the only rule is bring your own mud. First comes the staking, driving long, pointed posts into the lake bed in a neat rectangle. This is called apinali, and it forms the bones of the plot. These stakes, often from fast-growing trees like awexel or awiwetl, types of willows or cypresses, eventually take root themselves. So yes, the fences grow into trees. That's both practical and slightly witchy. Next comes the layering. Lake mud, reeds, grasses, more mud, more reeds, repeated until the mound rises just above the waterline. You're essentially building a floating lasagna, held together by roots and optimism. The final touch? Planting willow trees at the corners. These awiwetl not only hold everything in place with their monstrous root systems, but also create shade and wind protection. And yes, they're often considered guardians of the chinampa. You think back to the willow that looks like a question mark. It now seems a lot more deliberate. You try your hand at scooping and layering. It's less graceful than you'd hoped. Your first mound collapses in on itself, like a flan in a cupboard. But you learn. You get the rhythm. Dredge, slap, smooth layer. The elders offer the occasional nod, or, more often, a mildly concerned sigh. Eventually, your creation begins to hold. It's messy, lopsided, but it floats. Your host grins. His version, of course, is a work of geometric perfection. A mirror flatbed that looks like it was poured rather than built. He gestures to his chin, mimicking a beard. You understand, this takes years, and maybe a few gray hairs. The conversation drifts, as it always does, to the past. One elder tells you that in the old days, the really old days, the lakes were more generous, shallower, calm. You could build a chinampa in a week if the weather favored you. But things change. Water levels rise and fall. People move on. Chinampas vanish beneath the surface, sometimes resurfacing years later like sleeping giants. Historians still argue whether this system was borrowed from earlier Mesoamerican civilizations or developed independently by the Mexica. There are traces of chinampa-like farming in Xochimilco going back hundreds of years before the rise of Tenochtitlan. But the scale, the elegance, those seem uniquely Aztec. As you paddle back toward the main plot, you notice something strange. Beneath the water, half visible through the algae and reeds, are the outlines of other chinampas. Older ones, ghost gardens. Their grids are still there, faint and crumbling, like the ruins of a sunken city. It hits you then, these floating gardens are not just ingenious farming plots. They're also stories, layered over centuries, built on the backs of those who came before. Your soggy little island is the latest paragraph in a long, slow poem written in mud. Back at the plot, your host hands you a strange tool, a long pole with what looks like a rake on one end and a scoop on the other. It's for de-weeding, he explains. You wade into the canal and begin to rake along the edge of the garden, pulling up water plants that might choke the roots. Some are beautiful, long trailing vines with purple flowers, others thick and clingy like wet wool. You pull them up and toss them into a compost pile, already steaming from the sun. The smell is not subtle, but you're told this is the good stuff. Rotted lake weeds mixed with old fish bones, animal dung, and last month's tamale husks. Black gold, chinampa magic. You find a rhythm. Step, rake, scoop, toss. Step, rake, scoop, toss. The water laps gently at your knees. A fish brushes past your leg. You don't scream. Much. Your host pretends not to notice, which is very kind of him. Later, you help trim back the willow trees. Their branches grow fast, always reaching for the water like they're thirsty. You use a flint blade, surprisingly sharp, and etched with symbols you don't recognize. As you work, your host sings softly, the same melody from yesterday. This time, you hum along without startling any birds. The sun starts to dip low again. The chinampa glows gold, every leaf rimmed with light. Another day, another layer added, both to the soil and to your understanding of this strange, beautiful place. Tomorrow, you're told, you'll learn about water. Not just how to use it, but how to ask it for help. You nod, exhausted, but a little bit in love. By now, your muscles have adapted to a new language. The slow, repetitive grammar of paddles, poles, and mud-covered feet. You no longer flinch when a frog leaps out of nowhere, and you've accepted that your hair smells faintly of lake water. Congratulations, you're halfway to becoming chinampa folk. Today begins differently. No tools, no tasks, just your host standing beside a shallow canoe, holding a gourd filled with blue-gray water. He hands it to you and points to the lake. It's time to meet the water properly, he says, whatever that means. The journey takes you away from the tidy grid of chinampas and into a wilder stretch of lake, where the canals twist like vines and everything feels slightly older. The reeds grow taller here. Some loom overhead, forming narrow tunnels that filter the sunlight into soft green beams. Dragonflies flicker like sparks along the surface. Eventually, you reach a wide, flat stretch of open water. Still, silent. It reflects the sky so perfectly, you're not entirely sure where the lake ends and the clouds begin. Here, your host stops paddling and lets the canoe drift. He says nothing. You say nothing. The silence becomes its own kind of sound. And then he leans forward and dips a hand into the lake. This, he explains softly, is where the water speaks. You're confused at first. You've heard plenty of water in your life. Oceans crashing, rain pounding, even the sarcastic drip of a leaky faucet. But this is different. The lake is alive in a way you can't quite explain. You can almost feel it watching. Your host tells you the story of Calcayutlicu, the goddess of lakes, rivers, and streams. Her name means she of the jade skirt, and her moods are famously unpredictable. When pleased, she blesses the land with abundance. When offended, she floods entire cities. You're quietly hoping today is one of her good days. Offerings are sometimes made. Flowers, corn, even music. Some families keep tiny altars hidden in their gardens, pouring out a little water each morning in gratitude. It's not superstition, it's manners. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs viewed Calcayutlicu as a distinct entity or as one face of a broader water spirit worldview. But either way, the reverence is real and very present in this moment. You take a small flower from your tunic and gently place it on the surface. It floats for a while before drifting away, carried by the gentlest of currents. Your host nods in approval. You pass some invisible test. Now comes the practical side of things. You're led to a wooden structure that juts into the water like a dock, but smaller and more intricate. This is a tlacanali, a water gate, used to manage flow between canals. You watch as your host lifts one section and lowers another, diverting water from one chinampa to another like a liquid jigsaw puzzle. This is how they control flooding, prevent stagnation, and keep everything balanced. You get a quick lesson in lake hydraulics. The canals are designed with precise elevations, some so subtle they're invisible unless you're barefoot and very, very annoyed. Water flows from the higher inlets to the lower outlets, keeping things fresh. Too much rain? You open the far sluice. Too little? You chant gently and curse the clouds. The system's not perfect. You're given the honor of opening a small gate. It's heavier than it looks. With a creak, the panel lifts, and a rush of cool water floods into a dry canal beside you. Plants along the edge immediately perk up, as if sighing with relief. Your host grins. You're starting to understand the rhythm. And then a problem. A blockage. One canal refuses to drain. Your host frowns and hands you a long bamboo pole. You poke into the murk. Something resists. You poke again. There's a slurp, a splash, and then a massive bubble of decaying weed matter surfaces, reeking gloriously of swamp and stubbornness. Congratulations. You've met the dark side of water maintenance. The smell lingers. So does your pride. Later, you watch as another farmer sails by with a basket of axolotls. Those perpetually smiling amphibians that look like someone tried to invent a Pokemon using leftover jelly. They were once common in these lakes, prized both as food and as medicine. Today, they're endangered, but back then, they were a regular part of life. Some people believed they had healing powers. Others just thought they were adorable. You spot one swimming near your boat, pale pink, frilled, and entirely unbothered by your existence. It stares up at you, blinks, and swims away like a tiny water ghost. As the day winds down, your host teaches you how to collect algae. Not for eating, though some kinds are, but for fertilizing the chinampas. You use a net, gently skimming the surface. The algae is thick, dark, and tangled. It smells faintly of lake water and fresh growth. Once dried and mixed with soil, it becomes a potent nutrient booster. The Aztecs knew this. They didn't waste anything the lake offered. Historians still debate how much of the chinampa system was engineered versus grown organically over centuries of trial and error. But the genius is clear. This is a closed loop. Nothing is wasted. The water feeds the plants. The plants feed the people. The people care for the water. Over and over again. As the sun sets, you glide back toward the chinampas, the water now golden and glassy. A soft wind carries the scent of marigolds and smoke. You feel changed, not in any dramatic, novel-ending way, but in the small sense that something inside you has shifted one notch closer to stillness. You step off the boat, and the land feels softer underfoot, like it's welcoming you back, like it remembers your offering. Tomorrow, you'll learn what happens when the gods themselves are hungry. You wake before dawn this time, before the birds. Even, and the chinampa is cloaked in a soft mist that makes every tree, every canoe, every pile of reeds look like a shadow version of itself. The lake is quiet, and so are you. Your host appears with a serious expression and a bundle of fresh-cut marigolds. You're about to ask what's going on when he simply says, "Today is a feeding day." He doesn't mean breakfast. You follow him in silence across a low, mossy bridge into a part of the wetlands you haven't seen before, a place that feels older, deeper. The chinampas here are not just gardens, they're shrines. Tiny altars sit tucked beneath flowering trees, smeared with ash, dusted with maize flour. Some have feathers tied to their branches. Others host broken clay, cups, bits of bone, or glistening black obsidian chips. This is where the offerings happen, and not just to Calcaetlicu, but to the entire lineup of Aztec agricultural deities. Today, the focus is on Tlaloc, god of rain and storms, master of thunder, and famously a little moody. Your host lays the marigolds down on a flat stone beside a shallow basin. He sprinkles ground amaranth into the bowl, then pours a small amount of water from the lake. No big gestures, no dramatic chanting, just a quiet, practiced ritual. The kind you do not to summon attention, but to keep it. And then, in the lightest whisper, he thanks the rain for last month, and asks, gently, for a little more soon. Historians still argue whether these rituals were meant to literally appease gods, or to foster community, strengthen memory, and maintain seasonal rhythms. But as you watch your host straighten the petals on the altar like a parent tucking in a child, you suspect both interpretations are true. The gods matter, but so does the care. Further along the canal, you come upon a chinampa that's utterly unlike the others. No crops, no flowers, just rows of tiny statues carved from stone and wood. Most are barely 6 inches tall, worn smooth by time. You recognize some Tlaloc with his fanged smile and goggle eyes. But others are strangers, squat figures with frog legs, women with seed pods for hair, children cradling birds. Your host tells you this was once a teaching garden, used by priest farmers to educate apprentices about which gods favored which plants. There's a row of stones arranged like a calendar, and when he steps on a particular one, a hidden chime rings out from beneath the soil. You almost jump. He just grins. You're told that different gods were fed different things. Tlaloc liked frogs and rubber sap. Totec, the flayed god of regeneration, preferred gold and chili seeds. Seniotl, the maize deity, was content with kernels and song. Even insects were sometimes offered, especially butterflies, which were believed to carry prayers upward. One scholar once suggested that the chinampas weren't just gardens, they were theaters. Every harvest, every flood, every insect swarm was part of sacred drama, performed in mud and water and breath. You can't help but agree. Your host hands you a tiny basket filled with chapulins, spiced grasshoppers, crispy and faintly citrusy. You pop one in your mouth out of curiosity. It's oddly delicious. But no, this batch isn't for you. He motions toward a small carved face peeking from a tree hollow. You place the basket gently before it, feeling the strangest urge to apologize for nibbling one. Later, you help light a small fire near the base of a willow. It's for copal, a resin incense burned to please the gods and confuse mosquitoes. You fan the smoke toward the water, the rising plumes mixing with the mist in a dance that feels choreographed. A duck honks disapprovingly in the distance. You choose to interpret that as spiritual confirmation. As the sun rises higher, more people arrive. Elders, children, and a trio of teenagers carrying gourds filled with chocolate-scented atoll. They sing as they walk, a slow, call-and-response song that weaves through the reeds like silk thread. This, your host explains, is the offering procession. Not formal, not somber, just thankful. Together, the group scatters flower petals into the water. Some petals stick to the canoe edges. Others float toward the open lake, where herons stand like statues watching the ritual with the calm judgment of minor gods. Then comes the food. You're ushered to a mat laid with tamales wrapped in corn husks, fried squash blossoms, and a stew made with black beans and tiny floating herbs that smell like lemon and green onions. It's a communal feast, an offering shared with the gods by way of the community. Everyone eats. Everyone thanks. Your host leans over and whispers that the stew was cooked in an underground pit filled with heated stones and lined with agave leaves. God's like a little smoke, he says. You nod solemnly, mouth full of the best beans you've ever tasted. Later still, a boy no older than 8 walks up to the willow where you sat this morning. He places a single, slightly wilted marigold beside the copal ash. He doesn't say anything, doesn't even look around. He just sets it down and walks away. Your host nods. The little gods always notice that kind of thing. By the time you paddle back toward the main chinampa, the sun is fully overhead, the lake shimmering with the light of 100 tiny altars. The day feels lighter, brighter, fed. You too feel fed, not just in belly but in something older. Some small, ancient place in your chest that didn't know it was hungry until today. Tomorrow, you're told you'll learn about the empire that rose from this lake and what it cost. The morning air is already warm when you rise, carrying a faint scent of earth and smoke that clings to your clothes like a whispered secret. You step out onto the Chinampa's narrow paths, now feeling less like a visitor and more like someone slowly waking into the rhythm of this watery world. The lake is calm again, stretching out in soft blues and greens, broken only by the gentle ripple of a canoe slicing through its surface. Today, the focus turns to the heart of Aztec power, Tenochtitlan itself, the city that rose from this very lake like a stone lotus blooming in the water. You glide toward the city's edge, guided by your host, who speaks in quiet tones about the remarkable engineering feat that allowed a sprawling capital to float atop a swampy lakebed. It wasn't easy. Building a city on water required more than just skill. It demanded a profound understanding of nature's moods. You imagine thousands of workers shoveling mud, hauling reeds, weaving roots, and laying foundations with precision. Every stone placed had to hold steady against the shifting waters beneath. Historians still debate how much of Tenochtitlan's design was inspired by practical needs versus spiritual symbolism. The city's layout mirrors sacred geometry, with causeways radiating like sun rays and temples aligned to the stars. The urban planning reflects a delicate balance between the earthly and the divine, a fitting metaphor for a city built where water and land meet. You pass through bustling marketplaces filled with vibrant colors and intoxicating scents. Merchants call out softly, offering woven fabrics dyed with cochineal red, fragrant cacao beans, and shimmering obsidian tools. Children dart between stalls, their laughter blending with the gentle hum of everyday life. Nearby, women sit by the canals, weaving baskets and tending to pots of steaming atoll. The air is thick with the smell of corn and roasted chilies. You dip your fingers into the cool water and let it trickle over your skin, grounding you in the moment. Your host gestures toward the grand temple complex at the city's center, the Templo Mayor, its twin towers reaching skyward like giant guardians watching over the city. You can almost hear the faint echo of drums beating in the distance, calling the faithful to ceremony. Yet beneath the grandeur lies a practical world of everyday tasks. Fishermen casting nets into the lake, farmers tending their chinampas, artisans crafting pottery and jewelry. Life here is a delicate dance of survival and celebration, anchored by the lake's constant presence. As the sun arcs overhead, you find a quiet spot near the water's edge to rest. Dragonflies flit lazily, their iridescent wings catching the light. A gentle breeze stirs the reeds, carrying with it the soft murmur of distant voices. Your thoughts drift to the many lives intertwined with this place. The rulers who walked these causeways, the farmers who coaxed food from the earth, the children who played along the canals. Each one part of a living tapestry woven from water, stone, and spirit. You wonder about the costs of such a city, the labor, the sacrifices, the delicate balance maintained between nature and human ambition. What would it have been like to wake each day in a city that seemed to float between worlds? As you prepare to leave, your host shares a final, quiet reflection. The lake itself is both giver and taker, nurturing life while reminding all who dwell upon it of their place within a vast, living system. You step back into your canoe, feeling the gentle sway beneath you, and let the city's sounds fade into the background, carrying with you the memory of a world both ancient and endlessly alive. The morning greets you with a soft, golden haze that filters through the reeds like liquid honey. The lake feels different today, still familiar, but charged with a quiet anticipation. You step into your canoe, muscles remembering the gentle rhythm of paddling, the comforting resistance of water against wood. Your host steers toward a part of the chinampas system you haven't explored, the marketplaces. Not the bustling city stalls you passed yesterday, but the humble, everyday exchanges where the true flavor of life emerges. Here, the Aztecs trade not just goods, but stories, recipes, and the subtle art of negotiation. You watch as a vendor offers a basket of fresh nopales, prickly pear cactus pads, to a small crowd. The green pads glisten with dew, promising a crisp, slightly tart bite. Nearby, a woman rolls tamales with practiced hands, the corn husks folded tight around fragrant masa. You breathe in deeply, the scents mingling into an invisible tapestry of home and hearth. Your host explains how food wasn't just sustenance, but a vital social glue. Shared meals, communal feasts, even humble snacks sold at canal-side stalls were moments of connection. You're reminded of how today's street food culture has ancient roots, an ongoing celebration of flavors, textures, and human conversation. Historians still argue about how much of Aztec cuisine came from local innovation versus influences carried along ancient trade routes like the Silk Routes of Asia or the spice caravans of Africa. But the fact remains, the Aztecs had a palate both sophisticated and grounded in their environment. You sample a tamal filled with squash blossoms and amaranth seeds. The flavor's delicate and unexpectedly complex. Your host smiles and offers you a sip of pulque, a milky, fermented drink made from agave sap. It tastes sour and slightly sweet, like nature's own version of fizzy cider. Nearby, children laugh as they chase one another, weaving between vendors and canoes. A small dog trots alongside a woman balancing a basket on her head. The scene feels timeless, familiar yet foreign, like a dream you almost remember. You're drawn to a stall selling brightly colored chilies, some mild and sweet, others tiny and fierce enough to make your eyes water just looking at them. Your host warns you gently. These little peppers were prized for more than cooking. They were also used in medicinal remedies and ritual practices, adding a fiery spark to life and spirit alike. As the sun climbs, you notice a quiet rhythm in the market's pulse, calls and responses. The shuffle of feet on soft earth, the occasional splash of water from a passing canoe. It's a world alive with sound and motion, yet beneath it all lies a steady current of calm. Your host tells you about the role of market women, often overlooked in history, who wielded significant influence through their trade networks and social connections. These women shaped more than the economy. They were cultural hubs, keepers of recipes, traditions, and sometimes secrets. You try to imagine the countless conversations, alliances, and bargains sealed right here along these canals over baskets of maize and handfuls of cacao beans. Later, as you paddle away, you catch a glimpse of a woman balancing a tray of brightly painted figurines, tiny representations of gods and animals used in household altars. She smiles knowingly, as if she's guarding stories that only the lake itself could whisper. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the market and water mingle. Feeling the gentle pulse of a civilization built on connection, nature, and the simple magic of everyday life. The light shifts again, softer now, as you glide silently across the water toward a different part of the Chinampa network. Here, the gardens seem wilder, less cultivated, almost like a secret corner where nature and culture blend in quiet harmony. You notice clusters of flowers you hadn't seen before, delicate orchids, wild marigolds, and a startlingly bright purple bloom that seems to glow even in the dim light. Your host leans in, whispering that this section is dedicated to medicinal plants, an open-air pharmacy of sorts, where the Aztecs cultivated herbs and flowers believed to heal body and spirit alike. You reach out and touch a leaf that feels cool and velvety under your fingers, marveling at the centuries-old knowledge embedded in these plants. One of the more curious plants you encounter is tlacocanali, a shrub with tiny, sticky leaves used in poultices for everything from cuts to headaches. Your host describes how the Aztecs blended their botanical expertise with ritual healing, often involving chants and offerings to Paitcatl, the god of healing and medicine. Historians still debate the extent to which Aztec medical practices influenced later herbal traditions in Mexico and beyond. But what's undeniable is their sophisticated understanding of natural remedies. You imagine a healer moving through these gardens, gathering leaves and roots with care, speaking softly to the plants as if they were old friends. Nearby, you see a small stone basin filled with a frothy, dark liquid, zocotl, the ancestral form of chocolate drink. Prepared here not as a treat, but as a medicinal tonic, mixed with chili and other spices. Your host offers you a sip. The bitter warmth spreads through you, oddly comforting. A gentle reminder that even in healing, pleasure has its place. You notice some plants growing in patterns, spirals, grids, even star shapes, prompting your host to mention that the garden's layout wasn't random. It followed both practical and symbolic designs, believed to enhance the plant's potency and align the garden with cosmic forces. As you wander deeper, you find a patch of episode, a pungent herb used to ease digestive troubles. Your host crushes a few leaves, releasing a strong, almost medicinal aroma that makes you wrinkle your nose, but also feel oddly soothed. Not far away, clusters of pipiltzintli, tiny, bright red seeds, catch your eye. They were prized not only for their medicinal properties, but also for use in dyes and jewelry. Your host points out how resources from these gardens went beyond healing. They were woven into daily life, art, and identity. You pause beside a tranquil pool surrounded by papyrus reeds. Your host shares a curious bit. Some Aztec healers used crushed crocodile, dung mixed with herbs, as a sunblock to protect skin from harsh rays. You laugh softly, thinking of that odd but practical combination, a reminder that ancient wisdom often comes with a side of surprise. Before you leave, your host places a handful of dried herbs into a small cloth pouch, explaining that these would be carried by travelers as protection against illness and bad luck. You tuck the pouch into your pocket, feeling the weight of history and hope. As you paddle away, the garden's scents, earthy, floral, spicy, linger around you like a soft blanket. You realize these plants, quiet and unassuming, hold stories as vibrant as any temple or palace, whispering of life, health, and the gentle power of nature's gifts. The sun dips lower now, painting the sky with soft strokes of pink and orange as you drift toward the quieter edges of the Chinampa system. Here, the water reflects the fading light like a polished mirror, broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish or a bird skimming the surface. The atmosphere feels hushed, as if the entire world is holding its breath for the coming night. Your host steers the canoe toward a small cluster of huts built on stilts at the water's edge. These are the homes of the Chinampa Rose, the farmers and gardeners who tend the floating fields day in and day out. You notice their simple tools resting nearby: wooden hoes, stone knives, and woven baskets filled with freshly harvested crops. Life here is quieter, more intimate. Your host begins to recount the daily routines of these hardworking people, whose lives revolve around the careful maintenance of the chinampas. You learn how they wake before dawn, checking irrigation channels and repairing dikes to keep the water at just the right level. One of the more surprising details is the role of ducks, which the chinampas use to patrol their gardens. Ducks help keep pests at bay by eating insects and weeds, all while providing eggs and meat, a clever example of sustainable farming that feels remarkably modern. Historians still argue whether the chinampas organized their labor communally or operated as independent families, but what's clear is their deep knowledge of the lake's ecosystem. You imagine waking each morning to the soft splash of oars and the gentle quacking of ducks, the sun rising over a world balanced delicately between water and earth. Your host tells you about the festivals and rituals that mark the agricultural calendar, ceremonies to honor Tlaloc, the rain god, and offerings made to ensure bountiful harvests. You picture a gathering at the water's edge, with music, dancing, and the aroma of roasted maize filling the air. There's a touch of humor in your host's voice as they mention the occasional duck that was a bit too ambitious, causing mild chaos by wandering into neighbors' plots. A reminder that even in this carefully controlled environment, nature had its own will. As twilight deepens, fireflies begin to flicker among the reeds, their tiny lights dancing like stars fallen to earth. You feel a profound calm settling over you, a sense of connection to the many generations who lived and worked here, their lives intertwined with the gentle rhythms of the lake. The stillness invites reflection. In a world that often feels chaotic and rushed, the chinampas' way of life offers a quiet lesson in patience, care, and harmony with the natural world. You lean back, letting the canoe drift slowly, lulled by the soft sounds of water and night. The stars begin to appear one by one, twinkling above the floating gardens, a cosmic reminder that this place, ancient and serene, is part of a much larger story. Night settles softly over the chinampas, wrapping everything in a gentle, velvety darkness pierced by the occasional flicker of fireflies and the distant call of a night bird. You lie back in your canoe, eyes tracing the constellations reflected in the calm water around you, feeling the cool night air brush against your skin like a whispered secret. Your host begins to speak in a low, soothing voice about the myths and legends that surrounded these floating gardens. The Aztecs believed the chinampas weren't just practical inventions, but sacred gifts from the gods, symbols of balance and life born from the union of earth and water. One story tells of how the god Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird warrior, guided the Mexica people to settle on this watery land, promising prosperity if they learned to live in harmony with the lake. You imagine the people of that time, weary and hopeful, carving islands out of reeds and mud, trusting that the gods watched over their work. Historians still debate the extent to which these myths were woven into everyday farming practices, but the spiritual dimension is undeniable. The chinampas were more than gardens. They were living temples where earth, water, and sky converged. Your host's voice softens as they describe the rituals performed at dusk, when farmers would offer maize, flowers, and sometimes even small dances to the spirits of the lake. These ceremonies were quiet, intimate moments of gratitude, reinforcing the sacred bond between people and land. You picture the flickering flames of torches reflected in the water, the murmured prayers blending with the night's natural symphony. The air carries the faint scent of copal incense, its resinous aroma weaving through the reeds. A gentle breeze stirs, rippling the water's surface and carrying with it a hint of the day's harvest, the earthy smell of fresh corn and sweet herbs. You inhale deeply, feeling the calm wash over you like a slow tide. Your host shares a quirky detail. Some Aztec farmers believe that the spirits of their ancestors lived beneath the chinampa mud, watching over the crops and ensuring their success. This belief added a layer of reverence and responsibility to every day's work. As you float in the dark, surrounded by the silent, watchful lake, you feel a deep sense of peace. The chinampas, with their intertwining roots and floating fields, seem to embody the delicate dance of life itself. Fragile, beautiful, and endlessly enduring. You close your eyes, letting the night sounds and stories meld into a soft lullaby, the rhythm of water and whispers guiding you toward rest. The first light of dawn seeps softly through the reeds, painting the sky in delicate shades of lavender and gold. You wake gently, still cradled by the calm waters of the chinampa. The world feels hushed and expectant, as if holding its breath before the day fully begins. Your host nudges the canoe forward toward the heart of the floating gardens, where a quiet bustle has already started. Farmers and gardeners are arriving, their footsteps light on the soft earth and wooden platforms. You notice the glint of sweat on their brows despite the early hour, the steady dedication in their movements. The day's work begins with a ritual you hadn't yet seen, a blessing of the tools. Wooden hoes, stone blades, and woven baskets are laid out carefully on a blanket of leaves. An elder steps forward, offering a prayer to Kalkayatlikyu, goddess of rivers and lakes, asking for her protection over the water and its bounty. You watch, mesmerized, as the group dips their hands in the water, scattering droplets like blessings. This moment of reverence before labor speaks to the deep respect the chinamperos held for the delicate balance they depended on. Historians still argue about how the seasonal cycles influence chinampa productivity, but everyone agrees the farmers' intimate understanding of the ecosystem was key. You imagine their knowledge passed down through generations, stories embedded in songs and ceremonies, survival woven into culture. Your host points out how some chinamperos specialized in particular crops. Some tended maize, others cared for beans or squash, each patch a small world of expertise. This division of labor allowed for diversity and resilience, a patchwork of green that thrived on cooperation. As you drift along, you notice patches of amaranth shimmering in the sunlight, tiny grains that were both food and sacred offering. The vibrant colors of flowers and vegetables create a mosaic that seems almost too perfect to be real. You reach a small island where children are playing near the water's edge, their laughter light and carefree. Your host smiles and shares how children often help with simple tasks, learning the rhythms of the gardens from an early age, a lifelong apprenticeship with nature. Suddenly, a heron lifts off silently nearby, its wings casting shadows over the water like a graceful painting come to life. You feel a quiet joy in the moment, a connection to a way of living where work, play, and reverence blended seamlessly. The morning unfolds slowly, a gentle dance of sun and shadow, water and earth. You breathe it all in, the smells, sounds, and textures, letting the peace of this ancient landscape settle deep into your bones. As the sun climbs higher, you find yourself drifting toward the edges of the chinampa system, where water meets sky in an endless horizon. The air is warm now, filled with the gentle buzz of insects and the occasional call of a heron or kingfisher darting between reeds. You lean back once more, feeling the smooth wood of the canoe beneath you and the quiet pulse of the lake all around. Your host begins to reflect on the legacy of the chinampas, how this ingenious system shaped not just the Aztec Empire, but left ripples across history and culture that still flow today. They describe how modern farmers and environmentalists look back with admiration, seeing in these floating gardens a model of sustainability and resilience. You learn that despite centuries of change, colonial conquests, urban expansion, and environmental challenges, the chinampas still thrive in pockets, their gentle magic quietly enduring. The lake's surface shimmers with the same life-giving energy as it did 1,000 years ago, a testament to human ingenuity working hand in hand with nature. Historians still debate how much the chinampa system influenced other civilizations, but its uniqueness is unquestionable, a floating harmony of earth and water that fed an empire and inspired countless stories. Your host shares one last quirky detail. The Aztecs sometimes used crushed bones from sacred animals to enrich the chinampas soil, blending spiritual reverence with agricultural know-how. It's a reminder of how deeply intertwined their world was, where every action carried layers of meaning. As the afternoon light softens, you watch the water lilies and papyrus sway gently in the breeze, feeling the slow, soothing rhythm of the lake seep into your own breath. You think back to the vibrant markets, the medicinal gardens, the songs and stories whispered beneath starlit skies. The chinampas, you realize, were more than gardens. They were a way of life, a delicate balance maintained with care, respect, and a touch of ancient magic. You close your eyes briefly, letting the sounds of water lapping and birdsong wash over you. The journey through these floating islands has been a quiet invitation to slow down, to appreciate the simple miracles of nature and culture intertwined. As the canoe drifts toward the shore, you feel a soft gratitude settle in, a peaceful ending to a story both ancient and alive. The gentle pulse of the lake lulls you deeper into calm. The air grows cooler, the sun's warmth fading into a soft embrace of twilight. You breathe slowly, letting the stories of floating gardens and quiet rituals drift through your mind like petals on the water's surface. There is comfort here in the harmony of earth and water, in the quiet persistence of life, and in the tender care passed down through generations. Imagine the soft rustle of reeds, the gentle splash of paddles, the distant hum of insects settling for the night. Let your thoughts float gently as the chinampas once did, steady, serene, and endlessly patient. The world slows. Your heartbeat matches the soft rhythm of the water, and you feel at peace. Now, carry this calm with you as you drift toward rest, wrapped in the quiet magic of an ancient lake that still breathes beneath the stars.